We have come to offer you a spot on our Galactic Council. Here is a list of requirements for joining. A world flag. Do we have the budget for this? Probably not. Here, use the flag of Wales. Perfect. Here. I'm only 50% sure that this wouldn't happen. Of all the images one could use as a unifying symbol for mankind, there exists none better than the dragon. Dragons have maintained a significant presence in cultures the world over for a very long time, right up to the present day, and in many diverse and interesting forms, always playing an important role in our myths. And exploring the full spectrum of its existence in culture offers a clear view as to why it's the best symbol to represent mankind in its entirety. Of course, doing an exhaustive deep dive would be a Herculean task, fit for the power and majesty of dragons, but well beyond my ability. But even the tip of the iceberg has so much to say about what dragons represent to the evolution of human culture and values. All dragons across world culture are the product of thousands of years of oral tradition, environmental observation, and cultural development. And they, like all other creatures or monsters of myth, have been used to represent the morals and values of different cultures over time. Many mythologies even feature dragons playing a key part in creation stories or otherwise acting as central figures in the advancement of human civilization, such as the rainbow serpent of Australia or the four river dragons of China. But the traditional image of dragons familiar to modern audiences has two basic portrayals in the collective conscience of global culture: fearsome opponent or respectful sage. And there's no image of dragons in Western culture more archetypal than as the abductor of helpless damsels in need of saving by knights in shining armor. While the use of dragons as a final boss for brave, honorable warriors to slay had been around for ages prior, this interpretation was largely popularized in the 13th century with the story St. George and the Dragon. Featured in the Golden Legend, this story tells of a dragon extorting sacrifices from a village in what's now Libya. First cattle were sacrificed, then the villagers' children through a lottery system until the king's daughter was selected. St. George learned of the situation and saved the princess, but, and this really dates the story as having been conceived during the Middle Ages, he promised to actually slay the dragon only if the villagers converted to Christianity, which they, of course, did. And now we move to the opposite end of the spectrum, where dragons are portrayed as wise and generous. And there's a few to choose from, especially in East Asian countries like China, so there's no single origin we can point to as the root of dragons being wise sages. But let's give the limelight to a younger dragon icon, the face of Mesoamerican culture, Quetzalcoatl. Being a religious figure in a polytheistic pantheon, Quetzalcoatl has a few different interpretations across Aztec culture, but the feathered serpent was primarily associated with knowledge, the arts, and crops, and being a creator of the cosmos and humankind. A good example of a myth showcasing Quetzalcoatl's generosity and wisdom is in the origin of maize. According to myth, the Aztecs could only hunt and forage for the longest time while maize was located beyond a mountain range that surrounded the Aztec homeland. Other gods sought to provide access to the maize by moving the mountains themselves, but were unsuccessful. Quetzalcoatl instead shapeshifted into an ant and journeyed over the mountains, bringing back a single kernel of maize from which the Aztec people could grow crops. For much of human history, dragons primarily either represented the ultimate evil or the ultimate caregiver, but rarely were they superseded by other, more powerful creatures. Even for a good chunk of the 20th century, this traditional dynamic remained largely unchallenged. But by the end of the 20th century, dragons began to take on a more pedestrian quality. Less so all-powerful beings meant to symbolize pure evil or profound wisdom, dragons started taking on roles that children could connect with on a more personal, intimate level. And this evolution was perfectly encapsulated with the TV show Dragon Tales, which ran for 3 seasons from 1999 to 2005. The show follows the adventures of 2 kids, Max and Emmy, who find a dragon scale in the playroom of their new house, which transports them to Dragonland, where they befriend 4 dragons who perfectly exemplify the diversity that dragons embody in world culture. Ord, who is strong yet fearful, Cassie, who is intelligent but shy, and the twin-headed neat freak Zack and the wild Wheezy. Like all shows aimed at young children, Dragon Tales was about imparting important life lessons on its viewers. While dragons have always been used to represent morals, this show represented the first big instance of utilizing dragons as a conduit for teaching complex morality with more mature themes. And moving into the new millennium, this interpretation of dragons as a friend of children grew and matured with the times, and reached the mainstream with DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon series, based on the 2003 novel by Cressida Cowell, which kicked off with the first movie in 2010 and continues to the present. In a mythical land where Vikings are constantly at war with dragons, the outcast son of a village chieftain named Hiccup seeks to prove himself as a dragon slayer using his intelligence in the absence of strength. But he can't bring himself to follow through with the kill when he successfully downs a dragon. The series explores themes of friendship and self-worth, and in many ways has become the face of this new friendly image of dragons. But the use of dragons for more complex themes certainly was never limited to just children's media, and this is showcased perfectly in the Fire Emblem series. Entries from the original in 1990 up to the new millennium's turn tended to use dragons either as the typical scary final boss, even if their role in the world was more fleshed out than most monsters from myth, or lollies meant to be a juxtaposition of cuteness and power. But entries developed after the year 2000 started using dragons as a vehicle to explore themes of prejudice, tribalism, and even love. Fire Emblem The Binding Blade and Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, released in 2002 and 2003 respectively, feature dragons being on the losing end of a cataclysmic war in the ancient past of the land of Alib. A war that forced all but a few dragons to relocate to another world, with the ultimate cause of this war speculated to have stemmed from humans' fear of the immense power that dragons possess. Without spoiling anything, the dragons resort to some dark tactics to overcome the humans' numerical advantage. Meanwhile, the great weapons the humans forged to gain their advantage ultimately resulted in the apocalypse. In contrast to earlier games in the series, dragons are less villains in their own right and more objects of desire for the game's human antagonists to further their own goals. Next up were the home console games, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, released in 2005 and 2007 respectively, which kicked up the thematic complexity utilizing dragons a few notches. Dragons are one of a few non-human tribes, collectively known as Lagoos, that inhabit the world of Tellius, which suffer from human prejudice, and harbor prejudice toward humans in return. But the thematic complexity is pushed even further as these games use the Lagoos to explore themes of slavery, dehumanization, and indeed, how the force we call humanity isn't exclusive to humans. And no spoilers, but there's one plotline which pays off at the very end involving a dragon character that really cuts to the heart of this. Nowadays, dragons in Fire Emblem are starting to embody a new value, that being the waifu, which further cements dragons' role as the ultimate vehicle for humanity's shifting values over time. And that word, ultimate, describes dragons the best. The ultimate adversary, the ultimate sage, the ultimate friend, the ultimate love. And given that the idea of dragons exists the world over, being used as a vehicle for morality and values with the evolution of time and culture, what other creature best symbolizes the human experience? And that evolution continues on. Even as the world becomes increasingly driven by machines and industry, dragons continue to be utilized as the ultimate expression of humanity's shifting values. And as the world becomes ever more connected, all the different evolutions of dragons congregate and take on new roles as they cross cultures, but their traditional roles remain ever present. Dragons are the ultimate creature of fantasy, but let's apply scientific principles to their existence to solidify what a dragon really is. And in order to determine that, we need to uncover the origin of the idea of dragons. Indeed, you might have asked yourself once or twice why dragons exist the world over in cultures that never interacted with each other across ancient history. It only makes sense that the origin of dragons is tied to the origin of humans, so there's only one place to go for the answer. "300,000 years ago, on the plains of late Pleistocene Africa, the human species took shape. Alongside these early humans lived a lineage of reptiles going back millions of years. And humans did what humans still do, take inspiration from their environment. The rain snake, as depicted in cave art around the Senku River in Lesotho, is believed to be the origin of the dragon motif, specifically due to its association with water, which I'll explain in a bit, and existing in a basal form compared to later dragon myths. And as humans migrated out of Africa, the image of this serpent was carried with them. From here, the diversification of the idea operated under the same process of natural selection that gives rise to all living things, based largely on their differing environments. So, we must ask the question, what's the difference between a dragon and just a serpent? Well, if we apply the process of phylogeny, then a dragon would be scientifically defined as any creature to evolve from a common ancestor. In this case, that would be the rain snake of South Africa. But how do we identify these lineages? Well, across all of world culture, a common similarity between all the different dragon myths is their association with water in some way, shape, or form. Regardless of their temperament, many dragon myths feature the dragons utilizing water either as a gift or as a weapon. Despite the vastly different physical appearances and demeanors they exhibit across world culture, this is the one characteristic that unites many of them. There's a study that was conducted to trace the phylogeny of dragons called... Yeah, I'm not going to try pronouncing that. Simply put, the study sought to trace the development of the dragon motif back to its roots along the paths of human migration, comparing physical and story attributes between different myths, eventually pinpointing the origin as South Africa. As a general rule of thumb, any dragon myth featuring an association with water or rain in some capacity will have stemmed from this common ancestor. From there, any descendants of these portrayals, even if the association with water has been lost, can be considered dragons. And now let's circle back around to the beginning of this video. What if they actually spent some money? Well, ideally we'd utilize the closest thing to a real dragon our world has. And going by our established criteria, our basal need is a reptile associated with water. While a simple serpent could suffice, different dragons exhibit many different physical attributes, so there's no need to limit ourselves to just snakes. Now, you're likely thinking crocodile or alligator or any of their close relatives, but we can do better. We can incorporate the familiar portrayal of dragons taking flight into our flag symbol. And you're undoubtedly thinking, there don't exist any flying reptiles in our world. Ha! There does! Remember, all descendants of a common ancestor fall within that clade. The Reptilia clade traces back to a common ancestor that evolved about 300 million years ago. This clade includes all recognizable modern-day reptiles like lizards, snakes, crocodilians, and turtles, but it also includes dinosaurs. And do you know what modern phylogeny classifies as dinosaurs? So, going by the criteria mixed together from both science and fantasy, what creature could we use that's a flying reptile associated with water? Perfect.